Hello everyone, and thanks again for joining me for Lesson 2 of campCODE. This week I'll be talking about loops. First of all, what are loops? Loops are used to repeat code over and over again without having to type the same thing over and over again. So for example, if I wanted to spin around in my chair right now, I'd have to type out the code for spin one time. But if I wanted to spin around in my chair 10 times, then I'd have to type the same code out 10 different times. But if I used loops, it would be much easier to write the code, and I can shorten it to just 2 lines. The first being my spin code, and the second being my repeat 10 times code. So you can see how it's much easier to read and write code when you're using loops. There are actually 3 different kinds of loops. So the first one is called a for loop, and that's the kind of loop we used in our example. In Scratch, this is called a repeat loop. So what this does is that it will repeat your code a certain amount of times that you tell it. And in our case, it was 10 times. The next type of loop is the while loop. And the while loop is also called the repeat until loop in Scratch. And this loop is used to repeat code until a certain criteria or condition is met. So for example, if I wanted to spin around in my chair until I was dizzy, the condition or criteria that I'm going to be meeting is me being dizzy, and then the code will stop. Lastly, we have our last loop called an infinite loop. And this is also called a forever loop in Scratch. And what this does is that it will run forever until you physically stop the code, just like the name says. So those are our 3 different types of loops. We'll also be discussing today something called a nested loop, and that's when you have one loop inside of another loop. And I'll explain when and how to use these nested loops in our assignment. So for this lesson, we will be making an underwater scene, so an animated underwater scene. And to start off with, we should go to Scratch. I'm just going to have it loaded up. All right, so hopefully after last lesson, you've already made your own account. So you can just click on the sign in button to sign into your account. But if not, feel free to follow along like last time by just clicking on the create button at the top over here, knowing that you are not able to save automatically. You'll have to save onto your computer. And also, once you've logged in, you'll see that there are a few new features in the Scratch Sandbox. At the very top of the page, once it loads, you'll see that there is an area where you can name your project. So I'm going to name mine Scratch Lesson 2. And also beside that is an orange share button if your account has been confirmed. And this, when you click on it, will publish your project so that other people on the internet are able to access it as well. All right, so to start off with a nice clean slate, we're gonna say goodbye to Scratch the Cat by clicking on the little garbage can on top of his sprite. And next we're gonna set our stage. So on the bottom right, we'll click on the choose a backdrop. And along the top categories, you'll see one that says underwater, which will be perfect for our underwater scene. And we're going to choose underwater 1. And you can see our background over here in our preview window. Next, we're going to add our sprite. So we're going to add 3 different sprites this time as well. And we're going to start off with our first one by going to the choose a sprite option on the bottom corner. We're going to filter by animals, so we're going to go to the animals category on top and scroll down until we find the pufferfish right over here. And what we're going to have this pufferfish do is we're going to have this pufferfish spin. So I'm going to move him to the top right corner where I want him to spin for the whole time. And when we start coding, first of all, we'll need to go to our event blocks and drag our when green flag is clicked block into our coding area so we know how to start the code. Next, we're going to go into our motion blocks and click on the go to X and Y position and drag that underneath our first code. So right now our code is telling us that when the green flag is clicked, we'll go to this top right corner position that I just dragged it to. Next, we're going to go on to the actual animation part, which is turning or spinning around. And that is, since it is a motion, it will be in the motion blocks in the blue, the left-hand side. So when you look down on the motion blocks, you'll see that there's one that says turn right 15 degrees, and there's one that says turn left 15 degrees. And it doesn't matter which one you choose, it just depends on which way you want him to spin. So I'm going to choose the turn right 15 degrees and drag that underneath into my code. So when I push the green flag button, like so, you'll notice that the pufferfish does rotate a little bit. It turns just a tiny smidgen to the right-hand side. And that's because right now we've only told it to turn 15 degrees one time. So we want this pufferfish to keep turning and turning and turning. We want it to turn forever. So since we're going to be repeating this piece of code multiple times, the best way to do it would be to use a loop. The loops are found in the control blocks, in the orange blocks to the left. You'll see that underneath the wait 1 second code that we used last lesson, we have the repeat 10 and forever blocks. And you'll see that they're also a bit of a strange shape. Since we want this pufferfish to keep rotating forever, we're going to take the forever loop and drag it into our coding area. So you'll see that it has this C shape, and that is because anything that goes inside of the C is what we're going to be repeating. So I'm going to take the turn code and I'm going to put it inside of that forever loop right in the middle of that C, and I'm going to add that to our code. So now when I push this green flag, you'll see that our pufferfish is now rotating and turning forever until I push this red stop sign at the very top over here, like so. And that's our first sprite animated. I'll also let you know that there is an option to make this sprite spin a little faster or slower depending on the degrees that it turns. So right now, when I push this green flag, it's turning 15 degrees every time. But if I wanted to move slower, I'll just make it turn less degrees, maybe 1 degree, and it'll move much slower. If I wanted to move faster, I can put it higher to, let's say, 30 degrees, and that would be double the speed of the 15 degrees we had initially. So I'm going to want it to move slowly. You can change it to however fast you want it to move, and I'm going to leave it and stop the animation. Next, we're going to move on to our next sprite. So on the bottom right, where the little cat head and plus sign are, I'm going to choose my next sprite. I'm going to go back into the animal category, and my next sea creature I want to add to my animation is the fish, right over here. You'll also see when I hover my mouse or my cursor over the fish that there are lots of different kinds of fish, and this is just a preview of all of the different costumes that this sprite has. So if you remember in lesson 1 when we did our baseball animation, that the batter had different costumes that it could change into, and so these different fish are the different costumes that this fish sprite has to change into. So I'm going to click on that, and we can see our little Nemo fish right in our preview window. So I want this fish to be in the middle of the animation, but I want it also to the left-hand side, because what I want this fish to do is I want it to swim back and forth and make a quick lap around the underwater scene. So how do we start coding? First of all, we'll have to add our event block. So on the left-hand side, in the yellow blocks, we're going to add our when green flag is clicked block. Next, we're going to code for its starting position, just like we did with the pufferfish. So going into the motion blocks, we're going to go to X and Y and put that underneath. Now we're going to have to start coding for the actual movement of the fish. So right now, we want the fish to move from the left-hand side all the way to the right-hand side over here. So I'm going to drag and drop, and I want it to glide there. So I would go into my motion blocks again, look for the glide blocks. So I'm going to glide it to this new position, glide 1 second to X is 164 and Y is 3. And so when I push the green flag, you'll see that the fish has moved from the left to the right, and the pufferfish is still spinning until I push this stop sign. Next, we want the fish to flip around and then start swimming back the other way, where it came from. So how do we do this? How do we flip or rotate the fish. So if you remember from when we did our quick tour of the Scratch sandbox, in the area where their sprites are, you'll see there's a direction property. So when you click on that, there's a little clock where you can change the angle or direction that your sprite is facing. So we're going to change it from 90 degrees facing the right hand side to -90 facing the left hand side. So now it is facing left, but you'll see a slight problem. It is now upside down. So there's a reason for this, and that is because when you rotate something, initially its default is to rotate it all the way around like a clock. But the way we want it to rotate is from left to right, like it's being flipped. And to set this so that it does that, you'll have to go into the motion blocks and scroll down to this block that says Set Rotation Style Left Right. When we put this piece of code in at the very top of our code, this will make it so that whenever we flip anything around to face another direction, it will only flip left and right rather than turn all the way around. So now that we've set that rotation style up, we have to point the fish in the right direction. So in the motion blocks as well, there's a block that says point in direction 90. And if you remember, 90 was facing the right hand side. And I want to take that and put it before I glide to the right. And then after, I'm going to take the same block again and put it underneath. And instead, this time, I'm going to have it point in the direction of -90. So it points to the left where we want it to go afterwards. So when I push this green flag, you'll see that it moved to the right hand side and then it flipped around to the -90 side. And now I want it to glide back to its initial starting position around here. So I'm going to go grab my block that says glide again and put it underneath there. So right now I've coded for it to go to the right, flip around, and then to the left, like so. But what if I want it to do that 2 times or even 3 times? So right now the blocks of code that code for it moving back and forth are these 4 blocks right here, where it points in the right direction and then glides there, and then points in the left direction and glides back. So if I wanted to repeat the same thing over and over again, I could just repeat all of this code maybe 2 or 3 times, but because we have loops that we can work with, we can simplify this much more. So we go back into our control blocks, the orange blocks to the left, and then you'll see there's something called the repeat block, and that says repeat 10 right now. So I'm going to drag this block into our coding area. And what repeat 10 means is that it will repeat anything inside of this C, inside of the loop, 10 times. But we only want it to repeat maybe 2 times. So I'm going to change this 10 to 2. And then just like in our first pufferfish sprite, I'm going to move all of this code that I want repeated inside of this loop. And then I'm going to add this loop to our main code so that when we click the green flag, we're going to make sure that any kind of rotation is set to a left-right rotation. And then we're going to start at this one specific spot at x is -173 and y is 4. And then for 2 times on repeat, I'm going to point in the 90 direction and glide to the right, and then point in the -90 direction and glide to the left. So I'm going to push the green flag. And that is 2 times and a success. All right, so one more little thing I want to do to this fish is, you remember seeing that this fish had many costumes. And if we go to the top costumes tab over here, we'll see that this fish has actually 4 costumes along the left-hand side. So right now we have little Nemo, then we have Dory over here, this other fish with fins, and then lastly this yellow fish. And what if I wanted to have the fish swim back and forth twice and then change to the next costume and then swim around 2 times again and then change to the next costume, and I want this to do it for all of the costumes that this fish has? Well, in that case, I'm going to have to go back to my code, and I'll have to use a block in the looks blocks. And the one I'm going to use is called next costume right here. And next costume makes it so that we'll go on to the next costume, and I'll put that at the end of our code so that at the end of the 2 loops that he makes, we'll change to the next costume. So I'm going to push the green. So that's 1, 2, and then costume change. And I want this whole piece of code to be repeated 4 different times because there are 4 different costumes that I want him to change into. So how would I do that? How would I repeat this code 4 times? Well, we learned that we could repeat the same code 2 times with the repeat loop, so let's just try that again. I'm going to go into our control blocks. I'm going to take this repeat loop, and I'm going to change the repeat 10 to repeat 4. And what do I want to repeat 4 times? I want to repeat all of this code 4 times. So I'm just going to put this in here and then add it to our main code. So you'll see that we have one big loop, and then inside we have another small loop, and we called that a nested loop. So when I push the stop and start again, we'll see that the fish goes back and forth twice, changes costume, goes back and forth twice, switches to the next costume, and lastly, switches to the 4th costume. So that's all 4 costumes that we've gone through 4 times, and they have done each loop or back and forth 2 times. And that is a nested loop. All right, going to stop our animation to stop our pufferfish, and we're going to move on to our very last sprite. So I'm going to actually get rid of my face for this one because this code gets a little bit long. Next, I'm going to go back to my choose a sprite area. Click on the animals section again. And this time I'm going to add an octopus right here. Click on that to add it to my animation. And I'm going to move this octopus to the bottom right. And what I want him to do is I want him to walk across to the left and then walk back across to the right. And this doesn't sound very hard. This sounds exactly like my little fish sprite, but there's a little bit of a difference. I want him to change between the current costume that he has and this second costume. So it looks like he's actually walking. So how do I do that in my code? First, I'm going to go into my event blocks and drag that when green flag is clicked block so I know when I want the code to start running. Next, I'm going to go into my motion blocks and drag the go to X and Y position underneath to have my initial starting position coded for. Next comes the parts where we have to figure out what to do. First, we want this octopus to move in the left to the left-hand side, and I want him to move 50 steps. So in the motion blocks, you'll see that there's something that says move 10 steps. So I'm going to change this to 50, and I'm going to drag this underneath into our code. But when I push the green flag, you'll see that the octopus, instead of moving 50 to the left, moves 50 to the right. And that is because when you put a positive number in for the move amount of steps block, it will move to the right-hand side. And if you want to move to the left side, you'll have to make this into a negative number, so you're going to the left 50 steps. So when I push this green flag, it moves to the left 50 steps. I also want it to change costumes when it's moving. So I'm going to go into my look blocks, and I'm going to use that switch costume block to start at octopus A right at the beginning before I move my 50 steps. And I'm going to take that same block and move it to costume B after I move the 50 steps to the left. And if you remember from the last lesson, when you change the costume, usually you have to add some controls to it. So when we go into the control blocks, I like to add wait 1 second after each costume change so I can actually see the costume being changed. And now when I push this green flag, you can see it moving one step to the left. So right now, all of this code right over here codes for one step to the left. And we want to take maybe around 5 or 6 steps to the left to make it all the way to the left-hand side. So how do we do this, knowing what we know about loops? If we want to repeat something 6 times, I think the best block to use would be the repeat loop. So I'm going to drag that in, change the 10 to 6, and then I'm going to take all of this code that I want to repeat and put it inside of that C. And then I'm going to add that to our main code. So now when I try to push this green flag, you'll see that it's moving 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 steps to the left. All right, so right now I'm going to stop our code so that the pufferfish stops moving. Right now, all of this code here is moving the octopus to the left. Next, I want to flip my octopus around and then move it to the right. So what do I do? Well, first of all, if you remember with our fish, we have to set the rotation style so that when we flip the octopus to the other -90 direction, it won't go upside down. So we're going to go into our motion blocks, scroll down to the set rotation style, and we're going to put that at the very top of our page. Then we're going to drag that point in direction 90 and put it at the beginning of our loop. Next, we're going to test this out. So push on this green flag to go, and it looks like our octopus is still walking smoothly. Perfect. And now I want to take this code right here, and because I've already done all this work coding for this step to the left, I'm going to right click on this whole big loop and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to drag it over here and click to duplicate, and in this case I want it to move to the right, so I want it to be pointing in the direction of -90, and I'm going to put all this code together. So this goes underneath there, and this goes underneath there, so that all of our code is visible. I'm going to click on this green flag, and the first loop makes it so that it's pointing in the 90 direction and moving 50 steps to the left. Then we have it flipping in the -90 direction and moving 50 steps to the right to the end. And there we are. We have our octopus moving back and forth along the bottom of the ocean floor. But what if I wanted to add something else to this? What if I wanted to make it so that the octopus was forever walking back and forth, just like the pufferfish? Well, in that case, we would have to use a forever loop, just like we used for the pufferfish. So if we go into the control blocks, and we take this forever loop and put it into our coding area, now we have to figure out what do we put inside of this forever loop. So what do we want it to forever be doing? We want it to forever be walking back and forth. So right now, this code over here, that the 2 loops that make him walk back and forth, if we put these 2 loops inside of this forever loop and put this at the end of our code, you'll see that we have a nested loop, but unlike last time with the fish, we have 2 loops inside of the big forever loop. And let's see if this works. So this may take a while for it to walk back and forth, but so far so good. You can see that the pufferfish is still moving. The fish is changing costumes, and it might stop very soon, right there. And our octopus has made his first lap. So right here is where we would find out whether or not he continues walking, and he does. So Because we set it so that both the pufferfish and the octopus are forever moving, I'm going to have to click the stop sign at the very top of the preview to stop my whole animation. And that is our animation for the day. So I hope you learned something new about loops, and I hope you use more loops in your animations in the future. Please make sure to leave your shared projects in the bottom comments if you want other people to check them out, and I would love to see them. And we're going to move on next to our advanced lesson now. So on my Scratch page, we'll see that Scratch lesson 2.5 is currently up, and this is the advanced lesson for this week. The advanced challenge for week 2, I added a background sound effect and I had that loop on repeat. And second of all, I had the pufferfish sprite move until I pushed the space bar. So when I push this green flag here, you'll hear the ocean sound in the background. And also when I push the space bar, the pufferfish will stop moving. So if you want to try this out, please do. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll see you next week.